r/AskReddit. Landlords of Reddit, what are your tenants from hell stories? I had a tenant remove the kitchen island and bring it outside by the pool because they needed an outdoor serving area. That must have involved a lot of work, when they could have got a similar result if they just put a table outside. Some people put real effort into being jerks. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. We had one tenant who wouldn't pay rent. We followed the protocols to evict him, but he kept getting the judge to agree to an extension. He ended up staying rent-free for 7 months. He also complained about anything and everything. The neighbors are too loud. Someone's car alarm went off across the street. One of the neighbors has a cat and I'm allergic. There is literally nothing I can do to remedy those situations. When he finally got evicted, he left the apartment in shambles. Holes in the walls. Curtains stained with what I can only assume was doo-doo. And the rug was littered with cigarette burns. I wouldn't wish someone like that on my worst enemy. Would you wish that man on himself? I would wish 10 of him on himself. My parents had some tenants when I was probably 7 or 8 that never paid the rent and they wound up getting evicted. My parents decided that they would save some money and we would just clean the place up ourselves. This was their worst idea ever. I didn't know what a lot of the stuff I saw that day was until much later in life. The first thing I saw when we walked in the door was a fish tank full of dead, exotic fishies. In the bedroom we found used condoms, used tampons, and used needles. Like, just laying around. Once we saw that bedroom, my parents gave up and hired a cleaner, but I heard what else they found. They found a cat shoved into the toilet of the master bathroom. It was terrible. Edit. To those who are wondering, my parents did report them for animal abuse neglect, but unfortunately nothing came of it. Sometimes I have self-esteem issues where I worry that I'm actually a terrible person. But I don't need to worry about that anymore. Because now I can always remind myself that I've never shoved a cat in a toilet. And that's pretty good. So before even going on Reddit and reading this hit, I was reading some very heart-wrenching stories. And then your comment made me feel good. So thanks for that. Used to have a job that involved cleaning and minor repairs of rental apartments and houses between tenants. Usually it was easy enough. But the ones who were evicted often made it a point to wreck the place on the way out. One particular arsehole decided to pack plumber's putty into the sink and bathtub drains. Then turned the taps on before he left. They had to get professional contractors to fix most of it. But I got to rip out a bunch of stinky wet carpet and water-damaged floorboards. Sounds like the work of the wet bandits. At least they didn't end up with the sticky bandits. Could you imagine trying to clean out sticky carpet? Used to work in lettings. We had a young couple move into a house. They were young and were using benefits to pay their rent. But the landlord wanted to give them a chance. 2 months later we got a call from a locksmith contracted by the police. The police had raided the house the night before because the young man was a drug dealer. They had literally smashed the front door frame out of the wall and the locksmith had been called in to make good. We called the girl. The young man was in police custody and she couldn't afford the rent and wanted out of both the tenancy and the relationship. We made a house visit to check the state of the door. It was pretty bad. They had a dog in a house with a no pets policy and it had been shut in a bedroom a lot. Fesses and chew marks, scratch marks everywhere. And they had smoked, no smoking policy, and the house stunk of stale cigarettes. The landlord agreed to let them out of the tenancy and get the house back on the market. It cost thousands to put the house right. New front door. Redecorate. All new carpets. It was just about ready to advertise when we had a call from the neighbor. There had been a disturbance the night before and he had to call the police. The young man, upon being released from police custody and unable to get back with his girlfriend, had broken back into the property a couple of days earlier to squat. He had then had a visit from his supplier he owed a lot of money to. His supplier ended up stabbing him. He almost bled to death on the brand new cream carpets. Once we'd got more new carpets in and fixed the broken window from where he'd broken in, we found a new, reputable tenant. A nice young man who was actually a drug counselor. Which turned out to be good because a lot of the local addicts didn't get the memo about their dealer being arrested and then stabbed. so he had a lot of visitors in the beginning and knew how to deal with them. Also, another woman with mental health issues tried to kill both herself and her kids by burning the house down. They all got out alive and she got help. Oh, and another guy threatened to kill me because he owed rent and couldn't pay, and I made him feel guilty. He got a visit from the police. What with me knowing where he lived and all. My favorite story was the tenants who lost their postbox key. The landlord posted them a new one. Edit. I know. Worst typo ever. But I'm just gonna leave it there. Also, another woman with mental health issues tried to kill both herself and her kids by burning the house down. They all got out alive and she got help. Can't tell if it's a typo, a Freudian slip, or bad pun. My parents have owned properties for a while, so there are a number. But the one that I'm personally invested in is the last tenant. They decided to rent out my childhood home and I suggested it to a coworker. I had worked with this woman for several years and thought she and her family were decent people. I trusted them. They brought bed bugs into the place, did quite a bit of damage to the walls. They also pulled out and sold 100-year-old hardwood trim, removed the central air unit and sold it, and just generally ducked the place up. They then proceeded to skip town after being kicked out once they found out that their wages were being garnished. Show up to your court dates. Kids. Having tenants leave behind a pile of trash, horrifying bathrooms, and holes in the walls is common. But I hold a bit of a grudge on this one specifically. I had a similar thing happen to my family. My dad owned a property that used to be a restaurant, and one day he asked what I knew about Kim. She was a year ahead of me in school and she seemed smart and reliable, and so my dad rented the old restaurant to their family. Big mistake. They trashed it. Their two gross big ugly dogs hit and peed everywhere. They put holes in the walls. They took plates and cups that had been part of the restaurant's original collection and would take them out back and use them as bullet practice. They just in general ducked the place up. It was horrible. They end up not paying several months rent and eventually my dad kicked them out. But not before they made the place totally unlivable. It's horrible. You never really know someone until you see how they live. I just don't know how some people can be so horrible and trashy. That last line hits home for me. My best friend lives in absolute refuse. I mean, I'm a pretty messy guy myself. But when the two of us moved in together, it was like living with a hoarder. I didn't see the living room floor for months. Notably, most of this was his girlfriend. But he didn't get her to stop. So I still count it as his. This happened to my friend's rental. Guy gets evicted. Instead of trashing the place, this ducking guy cut off chunks of drywall, put dead fish in the walls, and sealed it back up. Tenant was a carpenter. The owners couldn't figure out the smell for weeks. They repainted, got it professionally cleaned a few times, searched endlessly. Eventually, they figured something died in the walls and started knocking holes in the wall. Turned out to be that piece of hit move by the tenant. Last tenant left a single rotting sack of potatoes in a cupboard I never thought to open because it was above the oven and kind of out of reach. One day I start noticing mad amounts of fruit flies and rotten smells. I cleaned the place head to toe but couldn't fix the issue. It's not like I was even dirty in the first place. A few days later I decided to put something in that cupboard. When I pulled it open, a wave of fruit flies evacuated the cupboard and dove into my face. They were quickly followed by a smell that knocked me on my ass and I nearly threw up. I check all my cupboards when I move now. My bro put a glass of milk in the ceiling tiles of his slumlord's place in college upon graduation. Tenant rented an apartment that does not come with a parking space. An apartment in the building that did come with a parking space came available. He asked if he could have it. I told him it would be $XXX00 extra per month. He then started posting propaganda all over the property about the injustices that I supposedly committed for not giving him a parking space for free. He tried to get other tenants to sign a petition that would make me give up my parking space on the property. He then took us to court. He lost. But not without just a ducking nightmare of his little hit of a personality and sociopathic tendencies. The most annoying aspect of it all was the fact that he was this bullhead hippie dude who was all about peace and positive vibes and teaching yoga and hit. Wrong him though. And he was the most toxic human being you'd ever meet. That type of person will preach grace and mercy right up until it's their turn to hand it out. Then they do everything in their power to hurt as many people as possible as badly as possible and still try to act like the world owes them something. I work in the mental health industry. I see it a lot more than I thought I would going in. I knew a girl like this. She came across as super generous and open-minded at first. She turned out to be the most toxic narcissist I've ever come across. I have a couple tenant from hell stories. In 2007, an older couple decided to quit paying their rent. But they had pretty good excuses, so I didn't evict them until after 3 months of not paying. Finally went down to the courthouse to file an unlawful detainer on them. We finally had our day in court. The female, who was usually dressed nicely, with fake nails and an expensive weave, showed up looking like an old hag. The guy was using a walker. I roll this ducker didn't need one. They claimed I was a slumlord and never fixed anything. But I had receipts from every repair, including a new AC unit. After I got the judgment against them, I tried to garnish the man's wages. Was told he worked for Coca-Cola Company. Turns out they'd never heard of him. But after a little digging, I found out they had both been arrested for selling coke. The officer showed me mugshots dating back to the early 80s. They also stole the refrigerator. This past summer, I had a family of 7 move into a 5-bedroom house. They paid their deposit and first month's rent. That's it. Haven't seen another dime from them. To top it off, they didn't get the power switched into their name, so I got a $400 plus power bill. About a month ago, I called the water company. Turns out they never had the water turned on, so they have been stealing water. The water company pulled the meter. I'll be the one paying to have it put back. When I gave a 24-hour notice to do a walkthrough, with the police present, the woman answered the door, told me, "You can't come in. And we'll get out when you follow all the procedures," and the sheriff kicks us out. I think they've done this before. Said he worked for Coca-Cola. Was actually selling coke. Lol. Sounds like the landlord misunderstood. Landlord. What do you do for a living? Tenant. I sell coke. Landlord. So you sell Coca-Cola. When I was a little kid, my parents bought a cheap house in a neighboring town and fixed it up to rent. 2 young women moved in and were great. Just out of college. Working entry level and kind of getting by. No trouble. They called at 6 PM on Christmas Eve because there was a spider. My dad called back when we got home from church service and asked what they wanted him to do. They said they wanted him to kill it. So he went out on Christmas Eve to kill their spider. They seemed to think this was normal. Like about on par with what you'd expect your landlord to do if your water pipes burst on Christmas Eve. The least he could do given the situation. Not a horror story by any stretch. But it makes me laugh. He told me that I was not allowed to move out until I could kill my own spiders. Because duck that. I was a property manager for low-income housing and senior living buildings for a year and a half. I once had a lady call up saying she had a spider trapped under a house fan in her bedroom and asked me to come kill it. I told her I couldn't come out and kill the insect in her apartment. If I did it for one person but then didn't for another, I guess that opens the door for a discrimination lawsuit. Anyway, she tells me her kitchen sink is also clogged. Well, that I agree to come up and fix. I finish up some paperwork and head over to her apartment. Her sink is draining slowly, but it's a pretty quick fix, and she begs me to come deal with the spider. I agree, thinking it's been an hour. There is no way that spider's still trapped under this fan. I was wrong. This spider was the size of my hand. 4 years of Marine Corps infantry training and a small wad of paper towels was not enough to handle this monstrosity. Luckily I have 2 kids and I knew if I didn't survive it would be coming for them next. I managed to get it into the toilet and flush it. It's the city's problem now. Great. Now there's a giant mutant sewer spider out there somewhere. Biding its time. Brought bedbugs into the apartment building. 4 apartments total. Then called the health department to complain about bedbugs. Another person walked through the grass to go for a smoke while dragging the oxygen tank. Tripped. Fell and sued. Another person vacated her apartment. Left the window open in the middle of winter. Water pipe in the ceiling froze and cracked by the time we got to the apartment 1 hour later. Whole ceiling collapsed. 2-bedroom unit. Rented to 2 girls. Grown woman. Mind you with jobs etc. Complained there were roaches. Previous tenant had no roach problem. We even had it cleaned and so none. We get it taken care of. Still complained there were. Now we're thinking she or her roommate brought them. Skimmed to them both leaving on the 31st of October. We get the key and check the unit. It is trashed. They left most of their behind. Bottles on the counter. Glasses. Plates. Cutlery. Clothes. Shoes. Food just all over the place. And roaches. Lots of them. We call junk removers. They don't remove unless it's roach free. Called pest control. They advise to remove the things before they do their jobs. FML. I hate that hit. Sadly that is when you gotta rent a dumpster and get a few buddies to help you junk everything. And then one of your buddies accidentally gets pricked with a dirty needle. My extended family are, or were, landlords. Not sure if they got out of that what with the kind of crap you sometimes have to deal with. One story I heard was my uncle was having a conversation with someone outside a flat he was letting to some students. As the two were talking, a couch came crashing out through the front window. I don't know how long that lot stayed after that. The better story is another uncle had a nightmare family staying in a flat he owned. He had to kick them out because they caused nothing but trouble. Their son was sitting exams, so they asked if he could stay until they were finished and my uncle said yes. Eventually he left and my uncle went to see what damage was done to the flat. He found it immaculate. Everything was clean and tidy. Yet something seemed off. He went from room to room but could not find so much as a stain. Satisfied with the condition the flat had been left in, he exited a room and went to close the door. That's when he realized what was wrong. There were no doors anywhere. They had stolen every single interior door. I feel like I just read a Dr. Seuss story for adults. Thanks. I was trying to inject a bit of humor where I could. Despite typing most of that with gritted teeth. Semicolon. When I was a teenager, my family rented our downstairs unit to a small family. Nothing crazy happened. But the mom annoyed the crap out of me. My bedroom was right above theirs and she was constantly calling my parents to complain about noise. And when I say noise, I mean the faint sounds of someone walking down a hallway or some other BS. My parents decided to accommodate them by purchasing a rug to line our hallway and making it a rule for me to not be on the phone or up and about after 10 PM. But even after all that, she still found something to call about. Like how the duck are you going to complain about someone walking normally down a carpeted hallway? Keep in mind that we've had several tenants in that unit before they moved in and none had ever complained about noise. Once, I was up late in my room watching TV and the remote rolled off my bed, hitting our hardwood floor. I immediately grabbed it to mute my TV. But moments later, what do you know? Our home phone starts ringing at 1 in the ducking morning. The mother called about the loud noise she just heard and felt compelled to complain about it, even though it lasted less than a second. This type of scenario happened all the time and at the end of their lease they moved out. We then rented the unit to another family and never heard any more noise complaints. Good ducking riddance. Edit. Added details I remembered. Had a guy rent a studio in a 300+ unit high rise I managed. He seemed only semi-creepy. But when his brother arrived from Canada for a week-long visit, I realized it definitely ran in the family. The brother came out on their balcony at 6 AM and starts screaming that he wants to blow up a large nearby tech company that semi-creep worked at. As if that wasn't bad enough. He was wearing an open bathrobe. Nothing else. One of his neighbors thankfully called 911. We had SWAT on site for about 4 hours evacuating the other residents. Setting up snipers. The usual. Basically just another Monday. Not a landlord, but used to work for my stepfather when he had a business cleaning out and renovating apartments and houses where particularly bad tenants had been evicted. Their lease ran out and on moving out left most of their garbage behind. Here are some of the worst things I saw when doing that. Big old Victorian style house in a nice neighborhood. On moving out they left literally a foot thick pile of clothing covering the entire basement floor. which would have been fine if the pipes weren't also leaking. So most of the clothes were sopping wet and molding. Another large house, though in a less nice neighborhood. Dirty diapers left everywhere. Some wrapped up in old shopping bags. But a giant pile of them left sitting in the closet of what was obviously the child's bedroom. Townhouse style apartment. One of the rooms had several fist-sized holes in the wall and other rooms had obviously bad patch-up jobs done. And whomever had been making the holes decided that it would be a good idea to use the holes as garbage receptacles. Had to tear out all of the walls just to make sure we got all of the trash. Middle-sized house. Tenants had left lots of food in the house and power had been cut more than 2 months before they were actually evicted. The place smelled worse than the diaper place once the fridge was opened to reveal the 5 gallons of spoiled and rotting milk. Several rather large packages of meat and other rotting foods. This one honestly made me very sad. Small but nice house in a very well-off suburban neighborhood. Was being rented by guys who actually lived out of state. But would use it as a party house and drug den when they wanted to party or fell off the wagon. Trash. Broken furniture. Clothing and drug paraphernalia everywhere. Lots of tiny bags of various drugs. And marked medication bottles half full of pills. Needles hidden all over the place. Walls with holes or completely caved in. Mold and mildew everywhere. While cleaning out a room, went to empty out a desk to make it a little easier to get out to the dumpster and found tons of handwritten letters to one of the guys from his wife and children, all begging for him to get sober and be in their lives again. Including pictures drawn by what I assume was a small child in crayon and markers. Hitty crayon drawings, man, it hits you right in the heart like a good dick punch. It hurts like, well, I can't describe it. I work in property management. I used to work at a high-rise in downtown San Diego. I had a resident who would constantly complain about things that were out of our control, and then ask for a rent credit for his inconvenience. These complaints included too many homeless in the area, the restaurant across the street smells, tired of the dog next door barking when the owners come home, barks for only a couple minutes, etc. My personal favorite, where I just went off on him, was when he was parked in front of our building, a designated loading zone, and he received a parking ticket. This is a public street, mind you. So the only personnel that can give out tickets in this area are the meter maids with the city. He comes in barking at me about this ticket and asks us for reimbursement and an additional credit added to his account due to the emotional stress. I explained to him that it was the city and we have nothing to do with it and that your request is absurd. People will ask for any sort of reimbursements for the stupidest things. So I kindly ask, if you live in an apartment community, please be nice to the leasing professionals and management. I am not the reason your dishwasher stopped working, and no, I didn't decide how much your rent was. Thanks. Kate sounds incredibly stupid. Of course we want more stories. I ship Kate and Kevin. This is a two-parter. First was the worst tenant. Second was the tenant that was sent from above. The first tenant, who was a friend, lived in the house for 5 years. We never visited, cause it's like 50 miles away. Trashed the place. Slept on a moldy mattress in the living room with no sheets. Ducking barbarian. Smoke. Cigarette butts. Bottles everywhere. Everything was ducked. The backyard was just a weedy garbage mess. There was black mold everywhere cause the dude grew weed. And the humidity he kept in the house was just disgusting. There was a hole in the bathroom wall in the shower. I can only imagine the reason. He said we can keep the deposit. Gee, thanks, dickhead. Anyway, a few weekends of elbow grease and the place was at least showable. Wanted to rent the place to a friend's friend for cheap. But thought, well, let's open it up to the public. The first people to view it was a Brazilian couple. Wife owned a house cleaning business. Husband was a subcontractor. We thought about renting it to some young professionals. But gut feeling went with the older Brazilian immigrant couple that spoke little English. OMG, that was probably the best decision ever. We got higher rent by $400 moreover if we had handed over to the friend's friend, which turned out to be trash people. Turns out that friend was looking for a new place cause she and her mom just stopped paying rent for 6 months at their previous place. Once again, thanks, dickhead friend. I really hate those people now trying to duck us with their trash buddy. Well, the couple got to work immediately, cleaning up the place. Wow, the wife put her skills to use. The place has never looked better. They painted. They fixed. They cleaned up the whole backyard and planted veggies, corn, roses, put in an irrigation system, tore down and rebuilt a storage shed, installed a backyard patio deck for booking. The place looks amazing. I'll post some pictures. But I forgot to take before pictures or didn't want to cause the place was so gross looking. We went over for Christmas and they had a big tree and decorations and lights. Oh man. What a difference. They are never late with rent. They are the best tenants. Gave them free rent for last December cause of all the work they put in at their own expense. I hope they never move out. From what I'm hearing in this thread, living alone and refusing to house anyone is the correct way to live, and I agree. I was a landlord when my girlfriend moved in with me, and she had an empty condo. First 2 renters were fine, but then there was Kevin. Kevin was a single male. Good income. Seemed like a perfect tenant. We get into month 3 and the rent checks stop coming in. So we go to the condo to find out what the deal is. First off, there is a nice new flat screen TV, but no furniture and a giant beanball chair. We ask where the hell is the money. Kevin looks frantically through his Bible and is all like, I lost the money order. Sorry. Pissed off, we do a little more looking and it turns out he has a roommate. A silent muscular black man. Okay, whatever. But if you have a roommate you got to tell us, Kevin, so we can put him on the lease. Long story short, Kevin stays silent. And a few days later we come by to serve him papers and to begin the eviction process. Kevin's no-named roommate turns out to be a rapist who is out on parole. That is great and all, but we were right across the street from a school. Old Kevin was violating sex offender legislation. Thank God he left without much of a fight and were able to dump the condo at a modest profit. Ducking Kevin. Wait. Could this be the same Kevin that miraculously dodged survival of the fittest for thousands of years to one day eat a whole box of crayons and throw up? While in the 9th grade, twice? My family has had rentals all throughout my life. By far the worst renters have been family and friends. My mom's worst was her long-term boyfriend's daughter. Her apartment caught fire and my mom let her rent an old mobile home. Not long after moving in she almost burned that house down too. She ended up evicting her for non-payment. That same house was rented afterwards by my older sister and she neglected to notify us of any needed repairs. Had to replace the carpet, subfloor in the whole place. The last renters in my mom's nicest unit ruined brand new laminate with spills. Broke a pedestal sink in half and left pretty much every appliance in non-working order. They even changed the locks without telling us. I vacuumed 3 rooms for 10 hours and the dirt was still coming up. I don't think they ever vacuumed. She brought 3 cats and drama. It was my fault for accepting someone who wanted to keep 3 cats. Surprisingly, none of the trouble stemmed from her pets, which she kept immaculately clean. In fact, it was the cleaning itself that grew out of control. The first few months passed peacefully, with no problems. Then, she started lagging with her rent. This wouldn't have been a terrible issue, since I'm tolerant of a few days late and maintain a healthy savings buffer for unexpected expenses, vacancies and late rent checks. It was when I surprised her in the middle of one of her cleaning binges that things began to disintegrate. I had stopped by to grab some supplies in the house for a minor repair, or for a monthly inspection. She didn't expect me to appear in the building, and was carrying a spray bottle and rag in her hands. Apparently, this had been going on for some time. Another tenant warned me of some eccentric behavior she had noticed in her housemate, but didn't go into details. I should have seen the warning signs, but brushed it off at that moment. Her cleaning and reorganizing grew more intense, until it transformed into hostility towards the other tenant who did not share her intense focus. She insisted that the 3 of us meet to compile a schedule of how and when the other tenant would participate in cleaning of the house. The cleaner rejected any proposals that did not explicitly set an hour and minute along with the specific cleaning tasks for her housemate. The other housemate found this absurd, and would only agree to a general description of the cleaning tasks. Our negotiations failed to converge on an acceptable schedule, and I had to excuse myself while the cleaner shouted for me not to leave. After that, she bullied the other tenants and patrolled the kitchen anytime her housemate walked through or prepared coffee. Was it an obsession? Or just a front? She stopped paying rent, and this drama might have been just a distraction to earn extra time out of sympathy. In the end, I had to evict her. Strangely enough, both of them left at the same time, and I think that she might have shamed her housemate into footing the bill for her next apartment. Looking back on the whole thing, I'm surprised that she didn't find more success in a job where she cleaned houses. It won't make you a billionaire, but it will pay the bills and can always be found, especially in my city. Sounds like my sister. Living with her was a nightmare. I was expected to dry out the sink after using it. The sink. The sink is where water goes. She would vacuum so often that she had to buy at least 3 vacuums in the year I lived with her. It started destroying carpets because she'd just rip out so many fibers while she was cleaning, and they weren't new or anything. Eventually I made it a rule that she wasn't allowed to vacuum past 3 AM or before 8 AM. She very rarely followed that rule. I also had to trim her 5,000 plants while she was at work and dispose of the trimmings without telling her or letting her know it had been done because the plants had feelings and it upset her to know they'd been injured, even if it was for their benefit. I love my sister, but she is hit house crazy. I'd say the person you dealt with wasn't trying to manipulate you. People like that genuinely don't seem to understand why the rest of the world doesn't live the way they do. First day I moved into my apartment last year. My landlord told me about the worst kid to ever live there. He told us that there was this kid subletting an apartment over the summer for his rather shy sister. No problems. The sister was normal and he came with good recommendations. However, on the first night there, he threw a rager of a party. Loud music. Too many people. Didn't end until the police needed to be called for noise violations. The next morning, my landlord comes up and tells him that get-togethers are fine, but parties of that scale are not allowed. It was in the lease he signed, and he was willing to give the kid a second chance. Bad decision. More violent party this time, with property damage to boot. Landlord stormed up there and told him to have his hit out of the apartment by tomorrow at noon. The kid was pissed off and decided to throw a getting evicted party and got about 5 of his friends in there to trash the place and break everything they could find. They punched holes in the walls, broke lights and smashed the windows. It all came to a grinding halt when the kid decides to headbutt a hole in the wall and hit a supporting metal beam and broke his neck. The kid got charged with absolutely everything. The girls who lived there previously were politely told to not return the next year, and the kid missed his freshman year of university and $10,000 worth of scholarships because he couldn't leave the hospital or move independently. My landlord pretty well told me that as long as I don't do anything that stupid, that we will probably get along. My parents. First off, we were evicted from every house we lived in. As a kid, I didn't understand this. It was likely a combination of missing rent, garbage piling up, neighbor complaints about no one ever cleaning up dog shit, noise complaints, drugs, etc. When I was 12, my grandparents let us move into their rental. When I was 21, we were evicted. Don't get me wrong, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I grew up immediately and have never looked back. My parents stopped paying rent shortly after we moved in. My grandmother let it slide because she was looking out for me. I had no idea about this until I was much older. When I turned 18, my mom said I had to start paying my share of rent, $200. I didn't know she was pocketing it until I started paying my grandmother directly. It was chaos. When we finally moved out, I packed all of my shit in a moving van and went to an apartment. My parents did not. They left 90% of everything they owned in the house. But they didn't leave it neat. It was like they threw a tantrum and spewed almost everything they owned around the house. Water damage, wall damage, garbage everywhere. I told my grandparents I would help clean. With a couple of friends that had stayed with me at that house for various lengths, my grandparents rented a giant container/dumpster to put everything in. Not a regular dumpster. but like a modified shipping container. Over the course of 3 days, my friends and I filled it about 2/3s. My parents are smokers. When we started removing things from the wall, we could see the ridiculous color change from smoke-stained walls to the places pictures had been hung. In my parents' room, there was a wooden heart my mom used as a jewelry rack. It had various nails in it for pegs. It was nails to the wall with 27 nails. We counted. It was maybe a foot in diameter. Most of the drywall was destroyed. What wasn't had to be painted over. My grandparents said they spent well over 10k in 1999 for repairs. For their own kid. As of now, they own nothing from their past. They had a storage unit at one point that had the remainder of their belongings. They didn't make payments. Everything is gone, including pictures from my childhood and my ridiculous collection of Christmas ornaments from my grandmother. I should add, a demolition crew came in and filled the rest of the dumpster on days 4/5. My mom had some tenants in a rental property who apparently were serial crap sacks and would live in a place until they got evicted, then move on to the next place. They'd do things like not pay rent while claiming AC was broken or some other property related issue, then avoid actually letting it be examined or fixed. Long story short, after getting evicted they waited until the very last minutes to move out, left a bunch of their stuff behind, and filled a microwave with hot dogs which they left to rot. While my mom was in the process of getting a court order, the TV show Hot Bench, a Judge Judy spin-off, called and asked them to come on. Everyone got flown out to LA and my mom got her money and the crap sacks got berated on national daytime TV. So I suppose it worked out in the end. Edit. Removed link due to personal information rule. Sorry. Wasn't thinking. Edit 2. Credit checks. My mom and stepdad have full-time jobs and started buying rental properties a few years back. It being inexperienced, they thought they were good judges of character and didn't do background checks. It mostly worked out for them. But they got burned and they've since learned their lesson and do a little more digging rather than assuming a signature on a lease and "I'll really pay, I promise" will be good enough. Moral of the story for prospective future landlords: save yourself a lot of hassle at the end by going through a minor hassle at the beginning and check applicants' backgrounds. Keep 2 things. 1. Your photographs and the second, your mouth closed. Man, these judges are brutal. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe to RedditQueen for the best daily content.